Tanya Nicole Catch was born on October 14, 1981 in Monongahela, Pennsylvania, a small town of less than 10,000 people. For the first 12 years of her life, Tanya's childhood appeared relatively normal if not happy on the surface. The Catch family, consisting of Tanya and her parents, Jerry and Sherry, enjoyed frequent vacations to Florida. As Tanya approached adolescence, the cracks in her family life began to widen, which later sparked a series of events that would ultimately lead to her vulnerability and exploitation. The first signs of trouble emerged as Tanya's parents' marriage began to deteriorate. What had once been a loving relationship devolved into frequent arguments and long periods of tense silence. The atmosphere in the household became increasingly strained, with young Tanya caught in the crossfire of her parents' discord. These arguments, often loud and heated, left a lasting impression on the young girl, shaking her sense of stability and trust in the adults who were supposed to protect her. In 1994, when Tanya was around 12 years old, several key events occurred that would dramatically alter the course of her life. Her father contracted a severe case of pneumonia that required hospitalization for several months. This health crisis not only affected Jerry physically, but also placed a significant financial strain on the family. With the primary breadwinner out of work for an extended period, the family's economic stability was severely compromised. During this period, Tanya's mother was left to manage the household and care for their daughter. However, the stress of the situation began to take a heavy toll on Sherry's mental health. She started exhibiting signs of paranoia and erratic behavior, which further destabilized the family dynamic. Tanya, already struggling with the absence of her father and the financial pressures on the family, now had to contend with her mother's increasingly unpredictable behavior. It was during this time that Tanya made a shocking discovery. She learned that her mother had been unfaithful to her father back when the girl was just 2 years old. This revelation, coming at such a vulnerable time in Tanya's life, shattered her image of her parents' relationship and added another layer of complexity to her already troubled home life. The knowledge of this past infidelity likely contributed to Tanya's growing distrust of adults and her sense of betrayal by those closest to her. As if the family's troubles weren't enough, Sherry's behavior continued to deteriorate. In a desperate attempt to make ends meet during Jerry's illness, Sherry reportedly began engaging in work, and as you would suspect, when Tanya found out, it further eroded her sense of normalcy and security. The situation reached a critical point when Sherry started to express her stress using violence. In a terrifying incident that would leave lasting emotional scars, Sherry attacked Tanya with a pair of scissors. While Tanya fortunately escaped physical harm, the psychological impact of being assaulted by her own mother was immense. This event ultimately led to Jerry's decision to divorce Sherry. Following the divorce, Sherry's involvement in Tanya's life became sporadic, and they became increasingly distant. In the aftermath of the divorce and Sherry's violent outburst, Jerry gained primary custody of Tanya. However, the transition was far from smooth. Jerry, who had been largely absent due to work commitments and his extended hospitalization, now found himself solely responsible for raising a teenage daughter. The challenges of single parenthood, combined with the lingering effects of his illness and the emotional toll of his failed marriage, made it difficult for him to provide the stable and nurturing environment Tanya desperately needed. In 1995, Jerry decided to move himself and Tanya to the city of McKeesport, Pennsylvania. At this time, Tanya was 13 years old. Jerry had met a woman named Joanne through a newspaper dating service, and their relationship progressed rapidly. After only 6 months of dating, he made that decision to move to McKeesport to live with Joanne. This was about 15 miles southeast of Pittsburgh and presented a stark contrast to the small-town environment of Monongahela. Once a thriving steel town, McKeesport was experiencing significant economic decline due to the loss of industrial jobs. This economic downturn had far-reaching effects on the city, contributing to higher crime rates and fewer opportunities for its residents. In fact, the city had gained a notorious reputation for its safety issues, being ranked as the 4th most dangerous city out of a list of 100 from the National Council for Home Safety and Security. For Tanya, the move from her comfortable suburban lifestyle to one of the most dangerous cities in the United States was nothing short of a shock. The new living arrangement brought its own set of challenges for Tanya. She now found herself sharing a home not only with her father and his new partner, but also with Joanne's 7-year-old son. This blended family dynamic was entirely new to Tanya, who was still grappling with the aftermath of her parents' divorce and her strained relationship with her biological mother. Furthermore, Tanya's relationship with her new stepmother was fraught with tension from the beginning. She felt that Joanne resented her presence in their new family unit. This resentment manifested in various ways that left Tanya feeling isolated and unwanted in her own home. Joanne would often organize family activities that deliberately excluded Tanya, reinforcing her sense of being an outsider. These could range from simple outings to more significant family events, all of which served to emphasize Tanya's status as an unwelcome addition to the household. The isolation extended beyond just being left out of family activities. In a particularly cruel move, Joanne would unplug the phone to prevent Tanya from calling her friends back in her hometown. Perhaps the most egregious move came when Joanne removed the door to Tanya's bedroom. Jerry seemed either unaware of or unwilling to address the tensions between his daughter and his new partner. When Tanya expressed her feelings of isolation and exclusion, she found little comfort or support from her father. That same year, Tanya began attending Cornell Middle School, to which she immediately faced challenges. One of the most pressing issues she faced was relentless bullying. She found herself targeted by other students, particularly girls, who seemed to single her out for no apparent reason. This constant harassment created a hostile and intimidating atmosphere, and it made it so that the girl not only felt at risk at home, but also at school. The bullying Tanya experienced took various forms. Verbal taunts and insults were common, with other students often mocking her appearance, background, and more. Physical confrontations were also a regular occurrence. Tanya frequently found herself involved in fights, often initiated by other girls who saw her as an easy target. Eventually, one of the fights Tanya was involved in resulted in her own suspension. In response to the constant bullying and hostile environment, Tanya began to develop coping mechanisms that, while providing temporary relief, ultimately contributed to her academic and personal struggles. One of her primary strategies was to skip classes. Her frequent absences from class did not go unnoticed by the school staff. It was during one of these instances of skipping that she first encountered Thomas Hose, the 38-year-old security guard. Instead of reporting her truancy, the guard used this opportunity to begin getting closer to the teen and ultimately grooming her. He established himself as the sole figure that offered her sympathy. As for Thomas's background, he had a troubled past and unfulfilled ambitions. He had always aspired to become a police officer, but never completed high school or obtained a GED. Many tend to believe that this failure contributed to his desire for power and control, which he would later exert over Tanya. Prior to his employment at the school, Thomas had a history of questionable behavior. He had been deeply involved in drug dealing, indicating that he was not opposed to partaking in illegal activities. This criminal background should have disqualified him from working in a school environment, but it went undetected due to inadequate background checks. He also lived on the second floor of his parents' home in the same city. Anyway, the grooming began shortly after 14-year-old Tanya started at the school in the fall of 1995. He quickly identified Tanya as a vulnerable target due to her troubled home life and difficulties adjusting to the new environment. He presented himself as a friendly and understanding adult figure, offering Tanya the attention and emotional support she desperately craved. Thomas's initial tactics were subtle. He would often take the girl out of classes to talk to her, creating opportunities for private interactions away from the watchful eyes of teachers and other students. During these conversations, he encouraged Tanya to open up about her problems at home and with her peers. He positioned himself as a listener, someone who understood her struggles in a way that other adults in her life did not. As part of his strategy, Thomas began providing Tanya with gifts. He would give her money for candy and cigarettes, to which Tanya accepted. These gifts made the teen feel indebted to the man and were later used as leverage for their inappropriate relationship. Thomas constantly criticized her family and friends, telling her things like, "I could give you a better life. You don't deserve what's going on at home. You don't deserve what's going on with your friends." A pivotal moment occurred when he caught Tanya skipping class on one particular day. Instead of reporting her, he engaged the girl in conversation. It was during this encounter that he kissed Tanya for the first time. As the grooming progressed, Thomas began to paint a picture of a better life for Tanya if she were to run away with him. He exploited her desire to escape her troubled home life, promising her freedom from the restrictions and problems she faced with her family. This promise of escape was particularly alluring to Tanya, who had already run away from home on several occasions. By February 1996, just months after their first encounter, he had convinced the teen to run away from her family and move in with him. Tanya, believing she was embarking on a new life with someone who truly cared for her, had no intention of returning home. The abduction itself was the culmination of months of grooming by Thomas. On February 10th, Thomas took Tanya to his home in McKeesport, where he lived with his elderly parents and his son. The house was just a few miles away from where Tanya had been living with her father and stepmother. This proximity would later add to the tragedy of the situation. Instead of beginning a pleasant new life with Thomas when they arrived, the man locked Tanya away from the rest of the world. The initial period of captivity was extremely restrictive and dehumanizing. For the first 4 years, Tanya was confined entirely to the second-story bedroom. This small space became her prison, where she was subjected to daily sexual abuse and complete isolation. She was not allowed to leave the room for any reason. She was forced to use a bucket as a toilet, and Thomas would only empty this bucket periodically, leaving Tanya in unsanitary conditions for extended periods. Her diet during this time was also extremely limited. Thomas would bring her scraps of food from his own meals, often just peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, a banana, and a can of Faygo soda. Sometimes he would smuggle leftovers from his dinner. This meager diet was barely enough to sustain her and contributed to her physical deterioration. In a particularly disturbing moment of the abuse, Tanya was forced to keep detailed records of their encounters in journals. He used these journals to brag to his co-workers and friends, further dehumanizing the girl and treating her as an object for his gratification. He repeatedly threatened to kill her and her family if she ever tried to escape or reveal her presence to others. These threats, coupled with the complete isolation and dependence Thomas had created, effectively trapped Tanya both physically and mentally. The man went to great lengths to keep Tanya hidden from his parents and son, who lived in the same house. This required constant vigilance on his part and added to the stress and fear Tanya experienced. The knowledge that other people were so close, yet unaware of her presence, likely contributed to her feelings of hopelessness and isolation. During holidays and special occasions, the confinement became even more psychologically torturous. For years, Tanya spent Christmas Eve locked in a closet, listening to the sounds of family celebrations happening just beyond the door. Approximately twice a week, in the dead of night, Thomas would lead Tanya down to a cellar with cold, concrete floors to allow her to take a shower. Throughout this period, Thomas continued to work as a security guard at the middle school, maintaining a facade of normalcy to the outside world. As the years progressed, the control over Tanya evolved. In 2000, after 4 years of complete confinement, Thomas created a new identity for Tanya, Nikki Allen. He introduced this new persona to his parents as his girlfriend, allowing her some limited freedom outside the house. By creating a new identity for her and gradually allowing her more freedom, Thomas reinforced his control while making it more difficult for Tanya to break away or reveal her true identity. Despite being held just a few miles from her family home, Tanya remained hidden for 10 years, with several chances for her discovery slipping through the cracks. When she first disappeared in February 1996, her father and stepmother initially believed she would return home within a day or two, as she had done during previous instances of running away. However, after 4 days without any sign of her, Jerry became increasingly worried and officially filed a missing persons report on February 14th. Unfortunately, the teen's history of running away worked against her in the initial stages of the investigation. Police were less inclined to take aggressive action, viewing her case as that of a typical runaway teenager. This perception was reinforced by the fact that Tanya had run away multiple times before, always returning home after a short period. Jerry found himself in a scenario where each report of Tanya's disappearance made law enforcement take him less seriously. The lack of urgency in the police response meant that crucial early leads were not pursued as vigorously as they should have been. One such lead came from Tanya's grandmother, who provided Jerry with a phone number she had found on a piece of paper Tanya had left behind during her last visit. When called, the number connected to a woman named Judy Sokol. Police did follow up on this lead, visiting Judy's home. She informed them that her house was often a refuge for runaway teenagers and children having problems with their parents. She claimed to have last seen Tanya in December 1995, when she had asked for a jacket before moving on. While this information could have been a valuable clue, it did not lead to any significant breakthroughs in the investigation. Another missed opportunity arose from a disturbing revelation about Tanya's past. It came to light that she had been assaulted by a man named Kevin whose children she had babysat. Tanya had reported that Kevin had forced her to touch him inappropriately. This information shocked Jerry and Joanne, who had been unaware of these incidents. Kevin was arrested, but the court hearing was scheduled for a time after Tanya had already gone missing. Due to Tanya's absence, the charges against Kevin were dropped. The timing of the disappearance in relation to Kevin's court hearing raised suspicions among investigators. They brought Kevin in for a polygraph test, during which he was asked if he had killed Tanya. While Kevin denied this, the polygraph indicated deception. Under pressure, he admitted to a encounter with the girl, something he had previously denied. However, this lead ultimately did not bring investigators any closer to finding Tanya. Perhaps the most significant missed opportunity in the search was the failure to thoroughly investigate Thomas. Despite him being questioned early in the investigation due to his position at the school, his reputation as a respected security guard seemed to protect him from further scrutiny. The community's perception of Thomas as a trustworthy figure was so entrenched that in 1999, Cornell Middle School celebrated an entire day dedicated to him. They even presented him with a plaque. As years passed, the intensity of the search inevitably waned. The case grew cold, and while her family never gave up hope, the active pursuit of leads diminished over time. This gradual reduction in search efforts represents another missed opportunity, as it allowed Thomas to become more comfortable in his deception and potentially take more risks that could have led to discovery if law enforcement had remained vigilant. Tanya's journey to freedom began in March 2006. By this time, Tanya was 24 years old and had been living under the alias Nikki Allen. The circumstances leading to her escape were a combination of increased freedom, a growing realization of her situation's abnormality, and a friendship that provided her with the support she needed to break free. In the years leading up to her escape, Thomas had gradually allowed Tanya more freedom to leave the house. This change in her circumstances was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided Tanya with opportunities to interact with the outside world and potentially seek help. On the other hand, it was a testament to the psychological control Thomas had established over her, as he believed she was sufficiently brainwashed to not run away. Tanya's limited freedom included permission to attend church and visit a local neighborhood shop. However, these outings came with strict instructions and a rigid curfew. Tanya later described her first experiences outside as terrifying, saying she felt like a deer in the headlights out there. Eventually, she got a part-time job at the neighborhood deli. It was here that she formed a friendship with the owners, Joe and Jeannie Sparico. Tanya observed the couple's family dynamic and realized it was vastly different from her life with Thomas. The contrast between the loving family environment she witnessed at the deli and her own situation began to erode the psychological conditioning Thomas had instilled in her. This growing awareness ultimately led to the decision to seek help and escape captivity. On March 21, 2006, she took the step of confiding in Joe. She revealed her true identity and the horrific ordeal she had endured for the past decade. Upon learning about this, Joe immediately took action. He contacted the authorities, setting in motion the events that would lead to Tanya's liberation and Thomas's arrest. The police arrived at his house that very night to rescue Tanya. After 10 years of captivity, she was finally free from Thomas's control. However, the psychological impact of her situation meant that her path to true freedom was far from over. In the immediate aftermath of her escape, Tanya faced the challenge of reuniting with her family and adjusting to a world that had moved on without her. While she was happy to be reunited with her family, the relationship, particularly with her father and stepmother, became strained over time. They held the belief that Tanya was partly responsible for what had happened to her, a perspective that only hindered the recovery process. On June 26, 2007, Thomas, then 49 years old, pleaded guilty to a series of charges related to his decade-long captivity and abuse of Tanya Ketch. The charges included statutory assault, 3 counts of involuntary deviant intercourse, 2 counts of indecent assault, endangering the welfare of children, corruption of a minor, interference with custody of children, and aggravated indecent assault. Interestingly, he was never charged with kidnapping despite the nature of his crimes. The trial was initially set to begin in February 2007, but it was delayed twice due to Thomas's mental health issues. He attempted suicide the day before the trial was to start, and in May, he was being treated at a mental hospital. During the court proceedings, Tanya, then 25 years old, faced Thomas and told him that she was no longer his puppet, and declared her intention to move forward with her life. "You took away my innocence, my childhood. You made me think my family didn't want me or love me, that no one cared or loved me but you," she stated. The sentencing took place on the same day as Thomas's guilty plea. He was sentenced to a maximum of 15 years in prison. The structure of the sentence allowed for the possibility of parole after 5 years. However, he ultimately served the full 15-year sentence. In addition to Thomas, another individual faced legal consequences in connection with Tanya's case. If you recall, I briefly mentioned a woman named Judy Sokol who occasionally housed runaway teenagers. She also pleaded guilty to charges of statutory sexual assault, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, indecent assault, and corruption of a minor. Prosecutors alleged that Judy had changed Tanya's appearance to avoid detection and allowed her and Thomas to have sex in her house. As for Tanya's life after captivity, she has become an advocate for raising awareness about similar cases of abduction and long-term captivity. She wrote a New York Times best-selling book titled Memoir of a Milk Carton Kid, The Tanya Nicole Catch Story. In 2024, her story was adapted into a movie called The Girl Locked Upstairs. However, Tanya has faced significant challenges in her personal life. She has had difficulties in her relationship with her father and stepmother, who partially blamed her for what happened. The process of healing and adjusting to normal life after such a prolonged period of captivity has been challenging. Despite these obstacles, Tanya has found happiness in her personal life. She got married in September 2018, and through her marriage, she has become a stepmother and step-grandmother.